Hey folks. Hey folks. Did you know that an estimated 5 billion plastic hand soap and cleaning bottles are thrown away every year? And if that's not bad enough, most cleaning formulas are 90% water, which is heavy to ship, leading to excessive carbon emissions. And these products often have nasty ingredients in them, like chlorine and ammonia. It's a lose-lose situation for everybody and the planet. And also, sometimes, because of these this microplastic situation, we're eating and drinking roughly a credit card's worth of plastic a week, which is not something I want to think about. The products that we are using every day are ultimately contaminating our water supply, generating hundreds of microplastics that we end up ingesting. So Blueland has set out to do something about it, eliminating the need for single-use plastic in the products that we reach for the most. I use Blueland at home with my dishwasher. Here in the office, all of our soaps and stuff are refillable, and we use Blueland and we swear by it. Blueland is on a mission to eliminate single-use plastic by reinventing cleaning essentials to be better for you and the planet with the same powerful clean that you're used to. The idea is simple. They offer refillable cleaning products with a beautiful, cohesive design that looks great on your counter. I gotta say, that tin that the detergent pods come in is just adorable. And if I wasn't using it for the pods, I'd be using it for decorative purposes or storage purposes. And maybe I gotta get two. Fill your reusable bottles with water, drop in the tablets, and wait for them to dissolve. You'll never have to grab bulky cleaning supplies on your grocery run, and refills start at just $2.25. You can even set up a subscription or buy in bulk for additional savings. Blueland products are independently tested to perform alongside major brands and are free from dyes, bleach, and harsh chemicals. From cleaning sprays to hand soap, toilet bowl cleaner, and laundry tablets, all Blueland products are made with clean ingredients you can feel good about. Blueland is trusted in over 1 million homes, including mine and including our office. It just feels good to know that the stuff that's going on your plates in the dishwasher, or if you're washing your clothes, that you're not going to have a bunch of gunk and chemicals and even plastics on them. Blueland has a special offer for our listeners. Right now, get 15% off your first order by going to blueland.com/majority. You won't want to miss this. Blueland.com/majority for 15% off. That's blueland.com/majority to get 15% off. And now, time for the show.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, May 7th, 2025. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Austin Kocher joins us to talk about Trump recruiting local cops to help deport people and more. And later in the show, Dr. Kellen Baker joins us to talk about the administration embracing anti-trans conspiracism, including conversion therapy. Also on the program, India's Hindu nationalist government strikes Pakistan and Kashmir, including mosques, breaking open a conflict between two nuclear powers, killing 26 people at least. All civilians. Israel kills dozens more in Gaza via strikes, and the starvation campaign continues. After bombing Yemen daily for weeks, Trump says he's come to an agreement with the Houthis on Red Sea vessel passages. I hope that includes a ceasefire, because that's part of...
The Houthis are saying that they're still allowed to strike Israel, so...
Okay. Tulsi Gabbard issues a directive to start spying on Greenland's independence movement. This is psychotic. Your tax dollars are at work there.
Think about that the next time there's some sort of white nationalist attack.
Yeah. Chinese imports hit a 2-decade low as Trump's tariffs begin to make their effects felt. An analysis of Trump's meme coin finds that nearly 800,000 crypto wallets have lost money, but the silver lining is that 58 made millions. So, something like the top 0.0001%?
Wait, 58 total accounts.
Oh, 58 total accounts, yeah.
Right, okay, I was thinking 58% or no?
No. 58 out of nearly 800,000. Okay, that gives you a sense of what's going on here.
Well, that's meritocracy. I'm sure those guys did the best crypto trading.
We are the best. House Republicans in states that expanded Medicaid under the ACA tell their House colleagues, hey, slow your roll a bit. This could affect me next election cycle. They're still going to try to cut Medicaid, maybe some other way. Trump wants Libya and Ukraine to take deportees. A second judge says the Trump administration has failed to produce evidence to justify its use of the Alien Enemies Act to remove people from the country. Trump to name a FedEx board member to lead the Postal Service. Of course, privatization's on the horizon. Schumer backs Fetterman, says he's an all-star. What kind of all-star?
At Schumer's main agenda item.
Yeah.
By his own admission.
He loves
pro-Israel.
Right, having a fellow anti-Palestinian racist in his caucus. Utah becomes the first state to ban fluoride in the water. And lastly, the FAA suspends the work of the independent panel looking at air traffic safety as 2 United passenger flights clip wings in San Francisco. I'm flying tomorrow, incidentally. I'm picking up incidentally from Sam, too. All this and more on today's Majority Report. It's an M-Majority Report hump day. I mean, that's just got to be turbocharged.
It's never happened before.
And since I invented the term and I embody a Majority Report. Hello, Russ. Hello, Matt. Sam and I are flipping days off because I'm off tomorrow. As I just mentioned, I'm taking a little long weekend with some of my friends for my bachelorette party. So pray for me, folks. We'll see how this flying situation goes. But I wanted to start here. We have 2 great guests coming up examining the Trump administration's malfeasance and just sadism on immigration and also its attacks on trans people. But we can't drop the ball on how Israel just continues to bomb Gaza, including on top of its starvation campaign. Gaza's government says that more than 3,500 children face imminent death by starvation at the current moment. It's been over 2 months of a total blockade by Israel of all medicine, food, and water. And I guess, honestly, this is probably the best time to bring to show this footage here.
Just before we play this, I'm still waking up to see on like the timeline of Twitter things like, oh, a restaurant was bombed in Gaza, killing dozens of people, and then the immediate replies of people who pay Elon Musk to get a check mark saying, I thought people were starving in Gaza, and you're saying there's a restaurant? The sort of nasty genocidal
they don't believe
frenzy
what they're saying.
Obviously, just because there's a restaurant doesn't mean there's food at a restaurant, you idiots. And just like the sort of casual, this is the stuff you used to talk about with like Radio Rwanda and stuff. And you see this is just a huge part of society with beepers in their usernames on Twitter and stuff like that. We have a profound sickness that's galloping across the world right now.
And I think that part of why liberalism is failing to confront so many of the different maladies in our society right now you can trace it back to that, because I think there's this impulse by many liberals to think that like everybody wants the same things, but we just have to find the right way to work together, as opposed to a more militant left-wing approach, which means, no, there are some people that need to be defeated. either by taking their money and redistributing it to the to the less wealthy, right? Redistributing resources via the government, via taxation, or whether it's like, no, these people can't be reasoned with. They're lying on purpose to justify genocide, and they like it.
They know what they're doing to these folks.
They like images like you're about to see. This is the Associated Press, obviously run by Hamas. I want to warn people that this is difficult to watch, but it's important to show this. These are children in Gaza just days ago. The child is 4 months old. She suffers from extreme low weight because of severe acute malnutrition. Those kids usually are lactose intolerant, and regrettably there is no alternative inside Gaza because of the war. And the border closures and the lack of special treatment milk. This is a doctor speaking at Nasser. You can see this child. There's no meat in the market. Go ahead, Matt.
I was just going to say, that special treatment milk that he mentions, we do have like a long-standing critiques of the impact of USAID and the uses it's been put towards. But the complete just pulling the rug out from under a program, guess what? USAID was paying for this sort of malnutrition assistance for Gazan children.
Exactly.
And it's disgusting. It's not like an attack on the deep state that Trump got rid of that. It's,
Because it's very important for just to build on what you're saying, the kind of food and nutrients that addresses this level of malnutrition is basically like a pace, because when you're at this point near death via starvation, your body's going to reject almost everything. It needs to be protein rich and easily digestible, and this is what USAID, what Trump cut in USAID, and this also applied to other nations in the world too. Like that, you can see that pace there a little bit. There's no meat in the market, no source of protein. Canned food is running out. There's no nutrition at all. Even healthy children with no diseases have started to come to us showing signs of lack of food, weakness, frailty and repeated gastric flu. All because of weakened immunity as a result of lack of food that helps them grow in a healthy way. It's important to show that footage, and just a reminder, as Israel announces that it's going to take the entire Gaza Strip. They've already seized 50% of its territory. And in the discussion,
there goes a liberal Zionist talking point. Well, they left the Gaza Strip. What do you want them to do? Oh, they took it back. Who would have?
They had it the whole time,
surrounded by guns.
It's just so frustrating that people can't conceive of an open air prison like this. They do not control their borders, land or sea. They don't have an airport. They don't have a they have Hamas as a militant group, but they don't have an air force. They don't have a state. That's part of why Israel will never agree to a two-state solution. It's one state, democratic, one democratic state from the river to the sea, both Palestinians and Israelis living together, or it is one state with just Israelis, and that's the reality they're trying to create now through genocide.
And some people might object to those images, saying, maybe not all Israelis want to see those images. The truth is, a big enough majority of them prefer those images than what Emma is saying, which is one person, one vote, and also people who were expelled through conquest and war crimes get the right of return to where they were expelled from.
Right.
Israelis don't want to see that. And neither do Zionists here, whether they're Mike Huckabee or Chuck Schumer.
Here is Netanyahu lying, lying about what they now are doing. They were just waiting for the right opportunity, and Donald Trump's presidency is perfect for him.
I want to make a few points absolutely clear. Israel has no intention of permanently occupying Gaza or displacing its civilian population. Israel is fighting Hamas terrorists, not the Palestinian population. And we are doing so in full compliance with international law. The IDF is doing its utmost to minimize civilian casualties, while Hamas is doing its utmost to maximize them by using Palestinian civilians as human shields. The IDF urges Palestinian civilians to leave war zones by disseminating leaflets, making phone calls, providing safe passage corridors. While
All right, we
War
get it.
zone is a special word that Israelis use for land they're about to steal.
We got it. I mean, you heard that. That's from January 2024. We know that that's contradicted. And also, we're hearing that there are talks right now with the United States about helping administer the Gaza Strip via military contractors. You can probably hear Eric Prince salivating from here. And there was a source that spoke to the Reuters that's compared the proposal to the Coalitional Provisional Authority in Iraq, which was
That went so well.
which was the government that the United States tried to impose on the Iraqi people.
We took a bunch of
when we were trying to overturn Saddam Hussein's
We
grip on
invaded
power.
and then
Yeah.
said, here's a bunch of think tank freaks from the Heritage Foundation or the American Enterprise Institute or whatever. They're going to be your new kings.
Yep.
They're like 30 years old.
But isn't that, and when you look at that proposal, the United States was heavily reliant on mercenaries, private mercenaries, with Eric Prince and Blackwater. And that's the proposal again. So we're about to talk to Austin Kocher about how the Trump administration is using something called a 287G agreement to try to enlist local police and sheriffs to help with their deportation regime. You know, the first time that was ever deployed was in 2002 in Florida with Jeb Bush as the governor in reaction to 9/11. Everything we're seeing right now, Richard Beck's book, Homeland, is an exhaustive examination of this, is an outgrowth of the war on terror and the erosion of our civil liberties from that point. And of course, neoliberalism and the economic conditions and how we have no social services to offer people, only like cheap goods and consumerism, and people are revolting against that economic model because it doesn't provide much for them. So fascism has a clear vision and clear enemies, and that's what unfortunately we voted in. And our democratic leaders aren't meeting the moment on this front. But in terms of the deportation and fascistic infrastructure that's currently being deployed, you can trace it back to 9/11. And this is why we're here right now. And we're circling back to a proposal that echoes our Iraqi occupation for Gaza. That's the reality of where we're at right now. And it's a failure of the two Democratic presidents that came in between the Bush era and Trump 2.0 for not doing more to rebuild our institutions to prevent this kind of thing, because they selfishly wanted to use that power for their own ends. With that said, a word from our sponsors, and then we'll be talking to Austin Kocher. When I started working here, you know, I pretty much realized that, yeah, we're kind of a do-it-yourself operation. Sam... Sam, he figures it out on his own, basically. I mean, we're working on the fly here.
In terms of my neurological capacity.
Setup, our cameras, our computers are all recycled for the most part. Even this desk Sam made himself. It can be really overwhelming for us in the office, and it's difficult to find tools that just make our lives easier here at the Majority Report. But we have found the right tool here, and millions of businesses have done the same, and that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, from household names like Magic Spoon to brands that are just getting started. Shopify has hundreds of ready-to-use templates to help you build an online store to match your brand, whether that's beautiful, edgy, or minimalist. Shopify is packed with AI tools. They help you put together product descriptions, page headlines. They can even enhance your product's photography. And best yet, Shopify helps you with managing inventory, international shipping, processing, returns, and beyond. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Sam has talked about this multiple times. He didn't even want to deal with merch. It's too much of a headache. But he found the solution in Shopify. It's his one-stop shop, our one-stop shop, for all of our union-made merch. Turn your big business idea into ka-ching with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/majority. Go to shopify.com/majority, shopify.com/majority. And you can, we'll put a link to this below in the descriptions. You can sign up for $1 a month trial period at shopify.com/majority. So that's a $1 a month trial period at shopify.com/majority. We're in the midst of spring, people, and fast-growing trees can help make your backyard, your online nursery, your apartment a little bit greener and more full of life. Fast Growing Trees is the biggest online nursery in the United States with thousands of different plants and over 2 million happy customers. They have all the plants that your yard needs, like fruit trees, privacy trees, flowering trees, shrubs, and so much more. Whatever plants you're interested in, Fast Growing Trees has got you covered. You can find the perfect fit for your climate and space, and Fast Growing Trees makes it easy for you to get your dream yard. You just order online and get your plants delivered directly to your door in just a few days without ever leaving home and having to go drive around dirt in your back seat. Gosh, I remember those days, honestly, going with my parents to like the greenhouse and stuff and how much of a headache that was. You don't have to do that anymore with Fast Growing Trees. Their Alive and Thrive guarantee ensures your plants arrive happy and healthy. And even if you don't have a green thumb like myself, you can't mess up, really, because I got an apartment plant, low light, for my bookshelf, Fast Growing Trees. Remarkably, I still have it alive to this day, which you can't say about me with other plants in the past. Their 14-point quality checklist ensures you're getting the best quality plants possible. You can talk to a plant expert about your soil type, landscape design, how to take care of your plants, and everything else you need. No green thumb required. And if you like to do your own research, their resource center is full of tips and advice from plant experts to help learn more about your yard's needs. So you know what will thrive in your area with your yard conditions, etc. You can check out their zone finder to see what growing zone you're in. Fast Growing Trees has the best deals, up to half off select plants and other deals. And listeners to our show get 15% off your first purchase when using the code MAJORITY at checkout. That's an additional 15% off at fastgrowingtrees.com using the code MAJORITY at checkout. Fastgrowingtrees.com, code MAJORITY. Now is the perfect time to plant. Use Majority to save today. Offer is valid for a limited time. Terms and conditions may apply. We will put the link below in the episode description. And lastly, Mother's Day is on Sunday. This is your reminder. And the number one thing that your mom or your grandma wants, or your aunt, they want you to call. They want a call from you, basically. But if you can't do that, well, do that anyway. But do this on top of it. You can give her that call, but you can also give her an Aura digital picture frame. I gave this maybe 2 Christmases ago. Sam just gave it as a gift to a big family. They love it. It looks really authentic. The photos look like it's a regular picture frame, but they change. And if you have, especially if you have a big family too, you can do a slideshow and a collection of all these different memories. It's super easy to set up. It takes about 2 minutes to set up a frame using the Aura app. You can add unlimited photos and videos and invite as many people as you want to a frame. There are no hidden fees or subscriptions. It also plays the live photos on your iPhone and up to videos that are up to 30 seconds long. It plays right on the frame. And there's an embedded speaker, if you want, that plays audio on demand. They look like real prints. Those Aura frames, they meticulously calibrated high-resolution displays, and unless you look really closely to see the photo transition, you will never know that it's a screen. You can share photos or videos to the Aura frame from any device, and they will instantly appear there wherever it is in the world. No memory card required.
It's really like, these social messaging apps with pictures.
Yeah.
For folks who can't do that, like say my grandma.
Yeah.
And even for folks who can, like, it's nice to just have that, not have to go to your phone and,
right.
Oh, there's a new picture on the thing of my grandkid or something like that.
And you don't have to waste the money of printing or it's all there for you to update and to surprise your mother this Mother's Day, or grandmother in that case. Aura has a great deal for Mother's Day. For a limited time, listeners can save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com to get $35 off plus free shipping on their best-selling Carver matte frame. That's AURA frames.com, promo code majority. Support the show by mentioning us at checkout. Terms and conditions apply. All right, quick break, and when we come back, we'll be talking to Austin Kocher. We are back, and we are joined once again by Austin Kocher, professor at Syracuse University and writer on Substack. You can go to austinkocher.substack.com. Austin is examining America's immigration enforcement system. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Happy to be here again. Thanks for having me.
Yep, it's always great to have you here to take us through what's happening in the Trump administration's deeply sadistic crackdown on immigrants and the family separation and throwing people into CCOT. I don't know when we last spoke, I guess, but maybe we can begin really broadly about what the past 100+ days have been like for you as somebody that analyzes immigration, and seeing those images, in particular the clip of him at that rally showing the people in chains to cheers of USA, USA. It was like it was written in a play or in a movie. That's what it looked like.
Yeah, the sensational aspect of this administration is beyond the pale. It's very difficult to watch in that way. I mean, what I always tell people too, because I talk to a lot of people across the political spectrum, is, I say, look, there's been really large numbers of deportations before in our history, in the last 120 years, certainly very high during Obama. It was also high during Biden. And whatever we think about the system, the laws are in place that if you wanted to deport people in a lawful way, you could do it without sensationalizing it. But this administration just is constantly pushing the legal boundaries, over the line and sensationalizing, the targeting and harassment and potentially torture of immigrants in this country. It's just it's hard for me to stomach, and it's hard for me to understand how anyone, regardless of their political views or views on the immigration system, would find this acceptable.
One of the major just stories, or I would say most heartbreaking anecdotes, but we continue to get them on a daily basis. You talked about this on your Substack. You wrote about it, and you also, I think, spoke to the lawyer of this woman out of Tucson, Arizona, who is being deported just after giving birth. It seems that she is also being blocked from speaking to an attorney, which is a through line across the Trump administration kidnapping and disappearing these people. I mean, deportation is a legal process. I say that colloquially, but that's not what they're engaging in right now. Tell us a little bit about what's happening in Arizona with that case.
Yeah, that's right. Really sad story. A woman was coming to the country for what appeared to be humanitarian reasons, got sort of separated and lost, and in her attempt to cross into the country, she was taken into custody. She was pregnant, and she was eventually taken to a hospital because she was going into labor, but border agents, or I should say immigration enforcement officers, blocked her room, didn't allow an attorney to see her. There's an attorney that I spoke to, did a interview with, to really get an understanding of what was really going on in this case. And sounded like he had contacted the family, had spoken to this woman through the family, through a text message chat. And, one of the sort of sick bureaucratic moments that I've heard recently. So border agents wouldn't allow the attorney to see this woman who was his client because he didn't have what's called a G-28 sign. That's the form that says that you're representing someone in the immigration process. But he didn't have the form signed because they wouldn't let her see him. So just a weird kind of bureaucratic thing where they're weaponizing these little forms and details to prevent people from getting adequate representation. So it's really really problematic in that way. Now, since then, I think partly because the interview with him ended up driving some media attention and some further support around Arizona. It sounds like she was reunited with her newborn. And they appear to now be in the custody of a local nonprofit organization, which is that's what we want. We want this person to have due process, whatever happens in the case. At least she won't, at least immediately, as far as we can tell, be deported. But just to be clear, for those couple days, for those 72 hours, it appeared as though our government was going to give this woman who just gave birth, she's in the maternity ward, the baby's being taken care of, it's less than 24 hours, and they're telling her, well, you can leave the country with or without your baby. It's up to you. And that's
this seems to be a tactic that they're deploying a lot, using women, mothers, and their children as a way to leverage their self-deportation. Like we're seeing some of those other cases, right, where children are being deported or detained, and there's it seems like they're separated from maybe their father even. It's hard to keep track of some of these horrific cases, but that's clearly a part of the playbook.
Yeah, that's right. They're really using the families and kids to try to convince people to leave. There's Thomas Homan has said, we saw family separation during the first administration. They tried to use family separation to deter people from coming to the country in the first place. And now they're doing the same thing, but they're doing it on a much broader scale. And I think they're sort of weaponizing immigrant families in ways that, push that line further. And, one thing I'll say, just because American Families United, is an amazing organization. They work with mixed status families, which basically means families where one or the other partner, or maybe children, some are immigrants, some are U.S. citizens. And so it's not as if these are just all immigrant families. Some of these kids are U.S. citizens, some of the parents are U.S. citizens. And just imagine, as a U.S. citizen, having to make the choice, either we can be a part with one part of our family in another country and part here, or we're being forced to all leave the country. So there are these in addition to the Trump administration saying that they are going to potentially deport U.S. citizens, and they probably have, and they probably will, and we'll have to sort that out. They are effectively, there's these kind of like shadow deportations of U.S. citizens, where U.S. citizens are effectively forced to leave the country or else be separated from their family.
And this is almost like a backdoor way for him to attack the concept of birthright citizenship, because their whole great replacement white supremacist theory is that these people from the global south, from South America, from Latin America, are coming to the United States not to free climate change or political violence, which is the reality, or to just have a better economic situation for themselves. They're coming here to systematically change the demographics of the country. And the Jews are probably orchestrating it. I think we can all agree on that front. But sarcasm, obviously. But that's like, they're basically trying to go after what they perceive as anchor babies. The idea that there's a marriage of somebody who's a U.S. citizen, somebody who may be either on temporary protected status or here without documentation, and they have a kid. They're trying to attack that very notion by, even if the child was born on U.S. soil, we're going to make sure that we make an example out of any parent that chooses to have a baby here in the United States if they're not properly documented, or even actually a U.S. citizen, although who knows if that even matters.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's constantly trying to attack different parts of the Constitution, different parts of our basic civil liberties and civil rights. It's again, like I said, every day I feel like I hear a new story that pushes this administration over the line.
Yeah. Okay. So the really important, well, this is all important, obviously, but you wrote a great piece talking about 287G agreements. I'm not seeing a ton of discussion about how the administration is deploying this, which is attempting to enlist local law enforcement into their deportation efforts. Just for a little bit of background, can you talk about the history of 287G agreements and when they were first deployed? And then we can talk about the present day.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of interesting because 287G is why I got into immigration research in the first place. I started doing research in 2009, 2010 as a graduate student because that was an era of this policy being rolled out. And a lot of us found major issues with it, but I really wanted to understand it. So here's the short story. Broadly speaking, the courts have said that individual states and counties can't do their own immigration enforcement because we can't have 50 different states doing 50 different types of immigration enforcement. There's 3,000 counties in the country. We can't have 3,000 counties having their own laws around immigration. However, there is a way to get around that. And in 1996, Democrats and Republicans together passed policy changes to the law that said, actually, we are going to allow local law enforcement to do this if they signed an agreement with the federal government. And it's called 287G because that's the section of the law, the Immigration and Nationality Act, that specifies these requirements. Now, this was a program that was not really used for the first many years. It wasn't until after 9/11 that the first 287G agreement was signed. And it just
Florida in 2002 by Jeb Bush.
That's right. The president's brother is the first one to sign one of these agreements. So Florida is kind of home and ground zero for 287G. Now, it rolled out. It took years for it to roll out. It expanded during the late Bush administration, early Obama administration. But because it received so much criticism, in particular, one type of 287G agreement called a task force model agreement, we really saw it taper off by the end of the Biden administration. And task force agreements are very important here. Some 287G agreements basically mean that if anyone gets booked into a county jail, that county jail can check this person's immigration status and ask them questions and potentially put them into the deportation process. Really an unprecedented power. But to be honest, it never really included that many jails, even at its height. And then the task force model is a bit more egregious, I would say, in the sense that it sort of gives police officers and sheriffs the ability to do immigration enforcement when they're just out pulling people over, talking to people on the sidewalk. So it's much more expansive. You don't even have to be in a jail to be affected by a task force model type of 287G.
A few questions about that. One, what was the nature of the criticism that caused them to be phased out, as you say, by the end of the Biden administration? And two, was there a version of, was that the authority that Arizona was exploring when they were trying to get cops to racially profile people to pull them over and ask for their papers? What was that, like 5 or 6 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. SB 1070. So basically, So the first question, the criticism of it has been that by giving immigration enforcement powers to your local law enforcement, one, they're not really trained to do that, even with the short training that they provide. Two, it potentially alienates communities that law enforcement need to work with through a community policing model. Immigrants are more likely to be victims of crimes than to be perpetrators of crimes. And third, 287G is just a civil rights violation magnet. There's just all kinds of issues and many, many lawsuits. It's potentially very expensive for these agencies who sign on. They start pulling over green card holders and U.S. citizens and potentially on the basis of race, which has huge consequences. So that's basically where the criticism was. And reforms in 2012 basically eliminated the task force model because there were just too many problems with it. If we remember that time period, this is the time period of Joe Arpaio, marching immigrants around in pink jumpsuits in the desert and tents, just a really terrible model. So that's why that went away.
And was that, speaking of Arpaio, was that part of the justification that was used by the Arizona state legislature? I forget exactly how that passed.
Yeah, that's right. And so that was an agreement that Sheriff Arpaio signed with the Department of Homeland Security. But then basically what was happening at that time is partly because of 287G, there was a real expansion of saying, hey, we want this at the state level. And the state of Arizona was basically saying, we want to do this without signing a 287G. We just want to pass a state law that looks like this, the Show Me Your Papers law. Now, interestingly, that law that Arizona passed did not all stand up. Some of it did, some of it didn't. The court struck a bunch down. But Florida has basically done the same thing times 100. They've said, we're not going to create our own law. We're going to create a law that requires all of the agencies in the state to sign on to 287G. In some ways, it's a smarter policy than the old Arizona approach, just because it is more legal, and now they're doing it. So what we've seen under this administration is the number of 287G agreements has almost quadrupled in just over 100 days. Not only that, a lot of them are in Florida. Basically, Florida is a giant petri dish of experimental immigration enforcement. Almost every enforcement agency in the state, not just your traditional ones, but also Fish and Wildlife, the Attorney's Office, Department of Taxation. I mean, all of these agencies are colleges and universities are signing on. So the whole state is just saturated in these policies. And worse yet, they've brought back that task force model agreement that was so criticized before. And we've seen the most growth has been among task force model agreements. So it's just a real quagmire at the moment.
And the fact that the entire state of Florida is engaging in this is deeply disturbing, because as you write about, that most previous 287G agreements were with county sheriffs. Arpaio is a great example of that. Can you talk about that incentive and why sheriffs were initially the parties that agreements were met with, and how and comparing that to Florida's expansion and even the other states that have signed these agreements like North Carolina and Georgia?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the sheriff's office in the United States plays a very interesting role. We talk a lot, when we talk about law enforcement, we're usually talking about cops and police departments. And the sheriffs kind of get overlooked, but the sheriffs are a really unique and very powerful office, mainly because they control the jails. So in any county, everyone who gets arrested, whether it's arrested by a police department, state highway patrol, or someone else, they all go to the jail. So basically, from ICE's perspective, if you want to increase your immigration enforcement capacity, you just get your agents and you get your technology plugged into the jail, and then anyone who goes to the jail, they're going to get screened for immigration purposes and potentially put into the deportation process. Now, so that's why sheriffs have been so important. Now, there's different ways of looking at this, and there's a lot of different perspectives. I think that's still a problematic model. However, at least if you're getting checked at the jail, there does have to be some initial, encounter, some initial arrests, maybe some initial charges. Again, I'm not saying it's legitimate, but there is an extra barrier.
A pretext, right.
Some kind of pretext, exactly, which is not always legitimate, but it's there. The task force model means you don't have to get booked into the jail. They don't even have to bother with taking you in. They can just, run your fingerprints, ask you questions while you're walking down the street, while you're driving home, or you're driving to the grocery store. And so in that way, it's a much more expansive way of saturating our everyday world with immigration enforcement in a way that the jail model alone doesn't do.
And you have said now that that these agreements have quadrupled. Where are they most concentrated? We've established Florida, but your piece on this, which I do think calls it the deportation army, says it's largely concentrated in the southeast of the country. Is that still the case?
Yes, that's still the case, although we're seeing a lot of other states come online, including in the Northeast and the Midwest. So it continues to expand. Oklahoma, I've seen a bunch of new agreements signed in Oklahoma for some reason, a few new ones in Wisconsin, and then counties in my home state of Ohio, like Butler County, are also coming back online with 287G. Some of these agencies used to have them. They went away. They stopped participating in the program, and now they're coming back online. But Florida is really where most of the action. I think about half or a little bit more than half of all 287G agreements right now are all in Florida.
And this, to wrap up here, Austin, this essentially means that local law enforcement, and even as more than law enforcement, if you're a state agency, can any state agency enter into this kind of agreement with the federal government?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any restrictions that would prevent any agency from entering in with federal government. I would assume that that it would be agencies that have some sort of law enforcement capacity or arrest authority of some kind. So even Fish and Wildlife, I mean, game wardens usually have arrest authority. They have some law enforcement capacity. So I'm not aware of any restrictions, so we really have to watch closely about who's going to be signing on.
Lastly, before we let you go, if you could just end our conversation talking about the implications of it and maybe giving some tips to people who might be in these states that have reached these agreements.
Sure. Having done research on this for a long time and talked to immigrants and attorneys and law enforcement in these areas, I remember talking to folks in North Carolina who they were very aware of which counties had these 287G agreements, and they would drive around them just because, the consequence of being arrested in a 287G county can be so radically different than a non-287G county right next door. So one is just awareness. Two is just, if to the extent that you have documents stay hyper documented. And keep copies and backups with other people. And third, and again, I hate to say this, but just have a plan. I think it's more important than ever for immigrants, whether you're documented or undocumented, or if you're a citizen and you have an immigrant background and you feel like you might be someone who could be targeted by law enforcement based on how you look in some way. It's just a good idea to have a contact person who understands your situation. And can react responsibly, God forbid, should something happen.
Actual last question, because this is one of our viewers, I am her name, Parade of Idiots, says, do the governors need to sign on to a state agency signing on to this?
Governors don't have to. The governors could play a role in either incentivizing or disincentivizing it, of course, and state legislatures probably could come up with some prohibitions or could further encourage like they did in Florida. I will say that there's already been one sheriff's office, and I'm forgetting the location off the top of my head, but there's one sheriff's office already who signed up during the Trump administration and has already pulled out because of local pushback against its policy. So sheriffs are elected officials. Remember that. And if this is a policy that you don't support, it doesn't hurt to let people know.
Austin Kocher, everybody should check out your Substack, Austin Kocher, KOCHER.substack.com. I check your writing multiple times a week to keep updated on what's happening with immigration. So I really encourage everybody to subscribe and read your writing. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Emma.
Oh. Sorry. All right, folks, quick break. And when we come back, we'll be joined by Dr. Kellen Baker. We are back, and we are joined now by Dr. Kellen Baker, Executive Director of the Institute for Health Research and Policy at Whitman Walker Health, a nonprofit community-based health organization specializing in LGBTQ and HIV/AIDS care. Dr. Baker, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me, Emma.
Of course. So last week, there was a 400-page report that was published by the Department of Health and Human Services, led by conspiracy theorist Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and it essentially backs conversion therapy for trans kids, is my reading of it so far. Take us through what this report means and how inaccurate much of the contents are.
Yeah, I think it's important to start first with what the report is not. It is not a clinical practice guideline. It is not a standard of care, and it is not a policy recommendation. So I think it's really important to understand that, because the way that the report is being presented by the administration and by many people out there in the world is that it does have something meaningful to say about clinical practice. But again, this report is not a clinical practice guideline, and it is not a new standard of care. What it is a very concerning example of politics dressed up as science. There are a number of things that you need in order to do good science, and this report has none of those things. So just very briefly, you need a good research question. All good science should start with a good research question, right? What are you intending to find out? And unfortunately, when you look at where this report came from, it was literally commissioned by the executive order that banned the very care that this report is supposed to have undertaken to assess. So what we have here is a post hoc putting together of something that is to justify a decision that has already been made. And to be perfectly honest, if we caught a graduate student in a lab making something up in order to justify something that had already been decided or had already happened, then we would call that bad science. We would have a problem with that. And unfortunately, that's really what we're seeing here, is a real lack of a substantive research question, in the sense of, do we actually want to find something out? Or are we just looking for a justification of something that we've already decided?
It feels very reminiscent of what happened in the UK with this CAST report. Is that a fair parallel to draw here? The anti-trans movement in this country borrows a lot from what Turf Island is doing over there, and it seems like this is a version of that.
The CAST report was commissioned in the UK in order to address a problem. In fact, in order to address a problem that in some ways is not dissimilar to the United States, the issue of people having to wait a very, very long time in order to get the medically necessary healthcare that they need. And so the CAST report actually comes to the conclusion that the full range of treatments that are outlined in the existing expert standards of care should be available because they are important. It calls for good research. It calls for, again, availability of all of the different treatments or different approaches that are outlined in existing standards of care. This report goes so far as to even claim that there is no way to do good research in this area. This report gives us no answers as to what should be done for young people who are experiencing gender dysphoria, for young people who are trans. It simply has the predetermined conclusion that there is no group of people for whom these treatments that are outlined in expert medical standards of care are ever appropriate. So it has not just a finger on the scale, but an entire fist on the scale, saying that there are essentially no benefits of the standard of care that is practiced by clinicians in the US and the UK around the world, and going so far as to really deny the existence of transgender people themselves. The report goes to great lengths to use language that makes clear at every turn that whoever put this report together, and I think that's another important element of this to point out, is that there is no knowledge as to who actually wrote this report. If this is science, then you do good science and you make it available and you talk about it openly. You put your name behind it because you would hope that you did good work. But what we see here is an anonymous report that was written by some sort of gang of 8 of people who we have no knowledge of who they are. And what they're recommending in this report is really a worldview that does not comport with reality.
I mean, the whole RFK Jr. takeover of our healthcare policy, and really the movement that he represents, that the Trump administration has embraced it tangibly, is an anti-peer review, anti-science concept. So it's anti-establishment, and in their view, it's the scientific establishment where these sneering experts who come together and review people's hypotheses, and if they don't find your conclusion accurate, they're just elitists. Like they see that as the problem, and they see that the standards of care that have been agreed upon via an exhaustive peer review process or via a doctor's using this kind of these standards of care in practice with their patients, they view that as the threat as opposed to helpful data to build healthcare policy. It's inverted in a way that I don't necessarily know if people have fully grasped the scale of how destructive an assault on peer review with healthcare looks like.
Yeah, and I mean, you really see this not just in transgender health, but in so many different areas, right? If we think about some of the political responses to things like the COVID-19 pandemic, to vaccines in general, to questions of whether raw milk can make you sick, right? There's very substantial bodies of evidence that show what science actually tells us. And then there are a lot of political opinions that, particularly over the last couple of years, but especially now over the last couple of months, have really suddenly become government doctrine. And all of a sudden, we have this incredibly, to use your phrase, inverted perspective where the federal government itself is spouting some of the very worst types of conspiracy theories that are not just anti-science, but are fundamentally dangerous. We have rules and regulations in public health or in healthcare or in food safety, because we want to keep people safe, because we can look at the science and we can tell what are the things that are going to help people be safe and healthy and well, and what are the things that are dangerous. And unfortunately, what is happening now is, again, a complete inversion of the idea that the government is supposed to be part of helping to keep you safe. Instead, what we have now is the government as a megaphone for some of these incredible conspiracy theories that used to be confined to, I would guess, the darkest corners of the internet, but now are suddenly finding expression and outlet in all kinds of prominent platforms. And that is not just concerning from the perspective of science and medicine, but downright dangerous.
Right, and you work at Whitman Walker Health, and it's a nonprofit community-based organization. So I feel like this is especially relevant. The idea that this is just this broader attack on healthcare in and of itself, and almost a weaponization as like a form of modern eugenicism, whether it's about denying the existence of trans people, pushing them back into the closet, which is a death sentence in many instances, denying their care, or the survival of the fittest bent of this like kind of anti-vax quackery. The attack on abortion rights, you can also put in that bucket. The assault on DEIA, that includes accessibility. The way that that autism is approached by the administration, to where it's working backwards from treating people if they have a disability or if they're trans as a malady, and using and making the policy fit that preconceived notion about folks. Because when we're talking about food safety and the more broad things that will affect us all, if you're wealthy, you're buying organic anyway. Like some of the standards where that stuff is going to be cut, it's going to affect people where they're already maybe buying meat that is inorganic, or that food is cheaper, where there's corners that can be cut. That's what I think the whole ideology, the umbrella philosophy really is. I don't know if you agree with that assessment.
Yeah, I think, you said, mentioned about these issues that affect us all. And I think it's too frequently easy to think that, this is just something about transgender people, or, oh, this is just something about one particular small, group of people. But what we're actually looking at here, both with this kind of broad-based assault on science overall, as well as this report particularly, is something that is incredibly concerning for all of us, because this is not really about trans people per se at its root. What it is about who gets to make decisions about your own life, who gets to make decisions about what kind of healthcare you can get. And when you look at a report like this that just attempts to brush aside decades of scientific and clinical evidence, that is an assault on the ability of any one of us, transgender or not, to go to our doctor and to actually get the healthcare that we need. And what we're seeing here is a real substitution of bureaucrats with a very clear political agenda in place of your doctor. And it's happening today for trans people. It's happening today in terms of people, in access to reproductive health care. But it is something that threatens us all, because ultimately what we want to know is that we're able to go to the grocery store and get, healthy produce and, know that it's not going to make us sick. We want to be able to go, any of us wants to be able to go to the doctor and get the care that our doctor recommends, because it's important for our health and well-being. And the trends that are really manifested in this report, as well as in so many of this administration's policies to date, are completely antithetical to our freedom to move through the world as people who are safe and happy and healthy and well. And that's just incredibly concerning, no matter which way you look at it.
And I'm going to ask if you don't mind touching on your personal experience as a trans man and having healthcare having, I guess, access to healthcare. You can speak for your own experience, but maybe just what it looks like for kids that need things like puberty blockers or hormones, or won't be able to get the care that they need at this critical stage of their development, perhaps because of these actions by the federal government. Like, what does that look like in practice?
Yeah, I mean, I am alive today because of the care that I was able to get. And I grew up in the 80s and 90s when nobody really knew the word transgender. It certainly wasn't something that I ever heard. And I didn't have really any help. I mean, it was a time when there were, very few understandings available broadly in the world about who transgender people were. And I was fortunate that I came of age, when transgender people were becoming more visible. And I actually transitioned when I was living in Moscow, Russia. I was working as a translator. And the fact that it is harder today for trans people, particularly young trans people, in more than half of US states to get the medical care that they need than it was for me 20 years ago in Russia indicates to me that the United States has a very serious problem. The United States has long been a leader in biomedical and scientific innovation. It has long prided itself on being a place where people can get the healthcare that they need. Now, we have a lot of issues with our insurance system, but in terms of sort of the medicine that is practiced in the United States, it has long been seen as a world leader. And the fact that the United States is now walking away from an international medical consensus, is walking away from evidence-based standards of care that have been developed over decades by experts, is something that, again, is not just concerning for trans people, but is so deeply concerning for everyone.
Can you speak about what that care looks like in practice? It's mystified by these right-wing reactionaries, but the processes that perhaps you had your unique experience, but even as a provider yourself, that your clients, or I'm not sure exactly what kind of healthcare you do. So, or what trans kids, what that interaction is like typically when you deploy these standards of care with their doctor, what trans care looks like, so people can understand it a bit better.
Yeah, so I'm a researcher. I'm a scientist. I have a PhD in health services research, which means I study the design and delivery of healthcare services. I do a lot of work in insurance. I do a lot of work in terms of understanding evidence-based medicine and how that translates into clinical guidelines. And so from the perspective of the standards of care, which have been around for decades, are maintained by organizations like the Endocrine Society, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, the American Academy of Pediatrics. What those standards are really outlining is an individualized and age-appropriate approach to care for a transgender person. No matter what age they may be, it is incredibly important that this care is individualized. And I would just note that that stands in complete and stark opposition to these bans, right, where the whole purpose of the standards of care is to note that there is no one-size-fits-all approach for everyone, because the healthcare services that transgender people need, they need to be individualized and they need to be age appropriate. When you have a ban, by contrast, that literally says there is no ability for understanding anyone's individual circumstances. I am just going to ban that care outright. So it's completely, these bans are completely antithetical to standards of medical ethics, to standards of care, the way this care is provided. When we're talking about children, young people before the age of puberty, all we're really talking about is listening to a young person when they tell us who they are. You know, for example, I've had my hair. I mean, I had more hair back in the day. You know, this is, but same haircut all the way from, when I was a kid in the early 1980s until now. Now that might be referred to as social transition, which just means, that if a young person wants to cut their hair in a particular way, or wear a particular type of clothing, or, use a name that feels more comfortable, that's the only type of support, the only type of care that we're talking about before somebody hits puberty. And when you do hit puberty, it's well known and documented in the literature that this can be a particularly distressing time for transgender young people. So the point there for the standards of care is to hit the pause button. Nobody wants young people making, impulsive, quick decisions. None of this is quick. None of this happens, over. I mean, we're talking about multiple doctor's visits. We're talking about multiple consultations with mental health providers, with entire teams of providers. And the recommendation, again, when young people hit puberty, is to hit the pause button so that you don't have that pressure of, oh, I need to make a decision. I need to think through what the next step is immediately because of this kind of ticking time clock of puberty. So puberty pausing medications have been used for decades. They are very safe. They are very effective. They're very well studied. And they're very often prescribed.
Including on cis kids that need puberty blockers. And you can have states like Florida that okay puberty blockers for cis children, but not for trans kids.
Yeah, and that is exactly what's at stake in so many of the legal discussions, I guess, or legal cases around these bans. Is you have these laws at the state level, but this is something that is being proposed at the federal level as well, that say as long as you're not transgender, you can get this care. So if you are a non-transgender young person who needs puberty pausing medications, you can get them. But suddenly, if you're a transgender young person, you can't. And that has absolutely no basis in medicine or science. It also, I'm not a lawyer, but would appear to me to have no basis in the law either, because that's a textbook case of discrimination. You are looking at someone and you are taking into consideration who they are as a trans person or as a non-trans person. And for that trans person, you are saying you cannot have access to these safe, beneficial, effective medications that you could have if you were not transgender. That's a clear-cut case of discrimination. And that is unfortunately exactly what all of these bans are doing.
Well, the Supreme Court just said that the Trump administration can implement its trans ban in the military. So the enforcement on this kind of discrimination is just not it's going to be non-existent for the next 4 years at least. But the part that I also wanted to make sure we got to before I let you go is what the report gestures towards in terms of conversion therapy. We know the effects of gay conversion therapy. There are countless stories, documentaries from my time growing up. I remember reading about it, seeing stories, and it kind of informing my worldview about what it was like to be gay in this country. And the pressure, I'm from the East Coast, it was a little bit more acceptable, but how there are these religious communities throughout the country that almost drive LGBT or gay or lesbian kids to suicide because they try to change who they are with these intensive, traumatizing conversion camps or therapy sessions. And we had largely agreed as a society that this is maybe, these things should be outlawed. They're still in existence, but that this is wrong. And that was a lesson out of the Bush era going into the Obama years. Now it appears like this administration is endorsing trans conversion. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's unfortunately really important to note that this report is an endorsement of conversion therapy. And the reasons for that are, if you look at the standards of care, the standards of care are very clear that mental health support is a critical part of medical care for transgender people of any age, but particularly for young people. So the standards of care already support the fact that mental health support, guidance, throughout the process is really, really important. But what this report then does is it says, no, not that type of mental health support. What I mean is a psychotherapeutic practice. I wouldn't even actually call it therapy, but a psychotherapy practice that takes a vulnerable young person and treats who they are as a transgender person as a pathology or as something that's not real. These approaches that frequently go under the term gender exploratory therapy, the report uses the phrase exploratory therapy, have these kind of twin principles at their core. And the one is either being transgender is not real. And the report, again, is very clear in a lot of the language that it uses, that the idea that transgender people are real is not something that this report believes in. And sorry, like, here we are. So, right. these psychotherapy approaches that are being discussed are not going to make trans people or trans young people not trans. They're going to make them miserable. And the other principle that this report really endorses is that it is possible it is possible to change someone's gender identity. So even if there is a therapist or a conversion therapy practitioner who acknowledges that gender identity is real, they then think that it's changeable and that it's actually possible and beneficial to try to change a core fundamental part of who someone is. And what we know, to your point about the literature and the experience of anti-gay conversion therapy, is when you take a vulnerable young person, you sit them down and you say, I don't believe anything that you're telling me about who you are. And in fact, I think that what you're saying about yourself is a pathology. I think there's something wrong with you. And I think we better explore that in order to root it out, in order to eradicate it. So what these exploratory therapy approaches really do, again, it is an incredible misnomer, because true mental health support meets people where they are and supports them throughout their journey. But exploratory therapy specifically says, I have a predetermined goal, and that predetermined goal is that you are not trans. And that is both impossible and incredibly damaging, exactly the way anti-gay conversion therapy is. Telling people that who they are is a pathology and trying to get them to change a core fundamental part of who they are is dangerous.
It is a level of, there's so much pop psychology that's thrown around these days, but this is gaslighting to this deeply harmful degree that also involves the deployment of societal and often religious shame that I don't think we can understate or overstate, I should say, what that does to somebody who's still exploring who they are, and they don't have a sense even fully of their own identity, but they know they feel a certain way. The level of trauma that engenders and that creates, this is why suicide rates for LGBTQ people, unhoused rates as well, because you have parents that buy into this thing and kick their kids out and they end up on the street, why those levels are higher than other groups. This is the direct result of that kind of approach.
Yeah, I know what it was like to grow up in the 80s and 90s, and this feeling the feeling that there was something wrong with me, the sense of shame that I was somehow wrong. And God forbid I had a therapist who sat me down and gave me that same message. God forbid I were a transgender young person growing up now, where we have bullies at the highest levels of power using their political platforms, their megaphones, to tell trans kids that there's something wrong with them. We have data from places like the Trevor Project, which is an anti-suicide hotline for LGBTQ young people, and they have done research looking at the mental health harms of the current environment that we are in, where transgender people are being treated as political footballs. And again, God forbid that you, as a young person, go to speak to somebody that you think is going to provide you with mental health support, is going to help you and care for you, and instead they sit you down and they tell you there's something wrong with you, and we're going to explore it to get to the root of it, and we are going to change it. That is so incredibly harmful for young people.
Right. And there's a version of this with abortion. Those trucks that would go around and offer people care, and then they walk in and it's a religious fundamentalist saying this is centers. Right. Yes. Thank you for reminding me of the name of those. Except as I delineated earlier, and as you speak about with your experience, this is about someone's whole identity too, and that is what the danger is here, and we're putting it mildly. But I really appreciate your time today, Dr. Kellen Baker. Thanks so much for coming on the show. Dr. Baker is the executive director of the Institute for Health Research and Policy at Whitman Walker Health. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Well, with that, we're going to wrap up the free part of this show, head into the not free half, the fun half.
I mean, it's pretty free.
I mean, yeah. Well, the not free, but we can't call it the fun half right now. I mean, I don't know. We've
called it the fun half through some pretty dark times.
It's the funnest half.
Yeah. Still be talking about the Gaza Holocaust.
Yep. If you can, and if you have the ability, we would really appreciate if you go to jointhemajorityreport.com. Help support us. We're trying to get these in interviews out, keep people informed about what the administration is doing, what our foreign policy is doing. In addition, jointhemajorityreport.com. You help support us, keep the lights on, and you can IM the show, and we will read your IM on air at one point.
Did you know you can care about more than one thing at once? For instance, you can care about the mass slaughter of a people and mass starvation of a people by a supposed nominal ally of the country that you pay taxes to, and you can care about the voids in the social circles of Zionist students who got ghosted after they told their friends that they support Israel. You can care about both those things, and you can care. All you need to do, even if you say exclusively emphasize the latter, is say I care about both, and then just continue emphasizing the latter.
Right, and I do think that there's a thing called proportionality too, right? Like I was maybe a little annoyed seeing some people going after Giselle Fetterman and that article. It just screamed to me as like somebody who feels that maybe they're not in the safest situation, or it's very difficult to leave your spouse and that kind of thing. And saying, how can you care about this when there's, this genocide happening? It's like, you can care about a lot of things at once. I mean, my cup is runneth over, but there's a degree of proportionality, and you got to care, yes, number one, about the genocide in Gaza. And as an aside, you can care about this woman that's in a tough situation, but not as much as the other thing. And that's how that works.
It should be probably exceedingly clear to anybody, how you're weighing these things on the scales.
It should be. It should be. Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Yeah, last night on Left Reckoning, Alex Skopik, one of my favorite magazine writers, talking about a few of his pieces at Current Affairs. One, how Trump is a landlord, and that is part of his identity that is underemphasized by a capitalist press in this country, even though it shouldn't be, as he both does policies that directly benefit landlords, but also treats Gaza like a real estate development project. And we also talked about how China treats billionaires. People might know that China also has hundreds of billionaires, but what people might not know is they have hundreds fewer than they had 2 years ago because Xi is cracking down on them. The ex-billionaire, folks. It's one of the most beautiful words in the world. We want to see more of it across the world, so we talk about what China is doing. And then finally, a piece he did called The Nazis on Aisle 9 on the widespread corporate collaboration with the Nazi party, and that goes far beyond, say, IBM.
I can't wait for that episode. That might be my plane listen, to get me relaxed for that flight that might crash. 646-257-3920. We'll take your calls in the fun half. We'll open up the phone lines on the other side. See you there.
Okay, Emma, please.
Well, I feel that my voice is sorely lacking on the Majority Report.
Wait, look, Sam is unpopular.
I do deserve a vacation at Disney World. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome Emma to the show.
It is Thursday.
Yeah, I think you need to take over for Sam.
Yes, please.
No, I'm gonna pause you right there.
Wait, what?
You can't encourage Emma to live like this. And I'll tell you why. So was offered her to tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. So was offered her to tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
What?
Tour, sushi, and poker.
Tim's upset.
Yeah, what you did to Tim Pool was mean.
Free speech.
That's not what we're about here. Look at how sad he's become now. You shouldn't even talk about it. I think you're responsible.
I probably am in a certain way, but let's get to the meltdown here.
Sushi and poker with the boys.
Oh my God.
Wow. Sushi. I'm sorry, I'm losing my fucking mind. So was offered a tour. Yeah. Sushi and poker with the boys.
Logic.
Tour. Sushi and poker with the boys. Boy. Tour. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid. Tour. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. Had this debate 7,000 times. A little kid. I think I'm like a little kid.